Emily Hart's last known moments began under the neon glow of a diner sign, while Victor Hale's quiet life on the outskirts of town had a secret so dark it would unravel into one of the most disturbing murder cases the county had ever seen. The morning air was thick people with fog, swallowing the forest path in a ghostly haze. Pine Hollow Forest was usually quiet at dawn, disturbed only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of crows. A lone jogger moved along the trail, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. She almost missed it at first, just a dark shape half hidden beneath a mound of damp leaves. Curiosity slowed her pace, and as she stepped closer, the outline of a human form emerged from the shadows. Panic set in before she could fully process what she was seeing. The body was twisted unnaturally, the limbs lying at angles no living person could manage. The young woman's skin was pale, almost bluish, her lips drained of all color. Her clothes were torn, soaked with mud, and smeared with streaks of dried blood. Her bare feet caught the jogger's eye immediately, and the detail that followed would haunt her for years. All of the toenails were gone. Not broken or chipped, gone entirely, leaving raw, exposed skin. The sight was so strange, so grotesque, that for a moment the jogger wondered if she was imagining it. But the truth sat heavy in the damp morning air. This was not an accident. The jogger fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling as she called emergency services. The operator's voice was calm, but the jogger's mind was spinning. She backed away, fighting the urge to run, her eyes fixed on the figure under the leaves. A blackbird landed nearby, hopping cautiously toward the body as if drawn by the stillness. Minutes later, the forest came alive with movement, police officers, paramedics, and detectives stepping carefully through the undergrowth. Yellow tape was strung between the trees, turning the secluded trail into a crime scene. The officers examined the body with grim expressions, their voices low. One knelt beside the victim, noting the deep purple bruises that covered her arms and the angry red lines carved into her wrists, the kind that came from prolonged binding. It was immediately clear to them that she had been restrained, possibly for days. The victim's face was swollen, marked by cuts and abrasions, making identification difficult. Dirt was tangled in her hair, and small flecks of dried blood dotted her neck. There was no purse, no phone, no jewelry, nothing to tell them who she was. The only clues were the injuries, the missing toenails, and the position of her body, half hidden as if someone had made a hurried attempt to conceal her but hadn't bothered to dig a grave. A detective scanned the area, eyes sweeping over the trampled leaves and broken branches. Whoever had done this had chosen a remote section of the forest, far from the main trail. It was the kind of place only locals or hunters would know. The mist clung stubbornly to the ground, making it harder to search for footprints or tire marks. Still, they began collecting soil samples and photographing every inch of the clearing. As the body was carefully placed into a black zippered bag and carried away, the forest fell silent again. The jogger stood at the edge of the tape, hugging herself, unable to look away. She knew she would never run in Pine Hollow Forest again. And somewhere, hidden among the fog and trees, the person who had done this might still be watching. At the county morgue, the young woman's body was laid out on a steel table under harsh white lights. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something colder, sharper, the unmistakable scent of death. A forensic pathologist began the careful work of uncovering her story, one injury at a time. It didn't take long to see that she had suffered long before her final moments. There were deep rope marks circling both wrists and ankles, the skin beneath them rubbed raw. The bruising patterns suggested she had struggled violently against her restraints, pulling until the flesh gave way. Her arms were mottled with blue and yellow patches, some older than others. Proof that the abuse had gone on for days. The most unsettling detail, however, was her feet. Where her toenails should have been, there were only tender, damaged nail beds. The cuts were jagged, uneven, suggesting they had been torn away rather than clipped. The pathologist noted that the wounds were inflicted while she was still alive. This was not an afterthought, it was deliberate pain. There were also small splinters embedded in the skin of her legs, tiny fragments of wood that hinted at a place where she might have been kept. Blood tests showed dehydration and traces of a sedative in her system. Whoever had taken her wanted control, wanted her to remain weak but conscious. Her cause of death was ruled as a combination of blood loss and shock, though the exact sequence of events leading up to it was still unclear. There were no signs of sexual assault, which only deepened the mystery of why such specific and brutal injuries had been inflicted. In the weeks following the discovery, the case consumed local headlines. Police released a sketch based on facial reconstruction, but for days no one came forward. The woman remained an unnamed victim, her story locked inside her silent form. That changed when a match finally came through a national missing persons database. Dental records confirmed she was Emily Hart, a 19-year-old college sophomore who had vanished after leaving her shift at a small roadside diner 3 weeks earlier. Emily had been studying psychology, working part-time to cover her expenses. Friends described her as cheerful and dependable. She had no history of risky behavior, no troubled relationships, and no known enemies. The night she disappeared, she had sent a quick text to her roommate saying she'd be home soon. She never arrived. Her car was later found parked in the diner lot, keys still in the ignition, as if she had been interrupted mid-action. For investigators, the revelation brought more questions than answers. Why Emily? What was the motive behind the strange, almost ritualistic injuries? Her disappearance had seemed like a random abduction at first, but the details now pointed to something more personal or more disturbed. Detectives combed through her phone records, work schedule, and online presence, searching for any hint of a connection to someone capable of such cruelty. The trail was faint, but somewhere within Emily's last hours was a clue that would lead them closer to the killer. Detectives turned their attention to the night Emily vanished, determined to trace her steps in the hours before she disappeared. The diner's parking lot was fitted with an old CCTV system, grainy black and white footage that flickered between static and distorted shapes. At first, the images seemed almost useless, then one frame stood out. At 9:40 p.m., a black van appeared on the edge of the lot, pulling into a dark corner away from the main entrance. Its headlights clicked off almost immediately, as if the driver wanted to remain unseen. Minutes later, Emily emerged from the diner wearing her work apron and carrying her backpack. She walked toward her car but paused, glancing briefly in the van's direction. The figure who stepped out was tall, their face obscured by a hood. They moved with purpose, crossing the lot quickly. The camera angle cut off before the two came into full view, but in the next frame, the van's side door slid open. By the time the camera caught the vehicle again, it was pulling out of the lot. Emily knew where to be seen. Detectives obtained a list of black vans registered in the county. Most were ruled out delivery companies, tradespeople with alibis, families who had no connection to the case. But one stood out. A 1998 panel van registered to Victor Hale, a 42-year-old carpenter. His address was listed on the outskirts of town, down a rural road that rarely saw traffic. A quick background check revealed no criminal history, but also no steady employment. He had been living alone for years, with little contact outside of buying supplies for his workshop. Neighbors described Victor as quiet but strange, someone who avoided small talk and disliked visitors. His property was surrounded by a rusted fence with stacks of rotting lumber piled high in the yard. He often worked late into the night, the steady buzz of power tools carrying through the still air. While none of this was illegal, the remoteness of his home and his access to woodworking tools made investigators uneasy. Detectives decided to pay him a visit. Driving up the long gravel driveway, they noticed the workshop immediately, a weathered structure separate from the main house, its windows covered from the inside. The van was parked to one side, dusty but in working condition. Its license plate matched the one from the CCTV footage. When questioned, Victor appeared calm, if a little guarded. He claimed his van hadn't left his property in weeks and said he rarely went into town. Without a warrant, police couldn't search his home or workshop, but the inconsistencies in his story and the eerie similarity to the vehicle in the footage kept him firmly on their radar. Surveillance teams were assigned to monitor his movements. Days passed with little activity until one night, investigators noted him hauling large, tarp-covered items into the workshop well after midnight. No one could see what was inside, but the image of the secluded building in the dark became burned into the minds of those watching, a place that might hold the answers to Emily Hart's final hours. A judge granted the search warrant 2 days later, giving investigators full access to Victor Hawley's property. The operation began just after sunrise. Officers moved in quietly, surrounding the main house and workshop while detectives approached the front door. Victor was taken into custody without resistance, though his expression shifted to something unreadable when he saw the officers heading toward the workshop. The structure stood apart from the house, its wooden walls weathered and warped from years of neglect. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old wood, oil, and something metallic that hinted at blood. Sawdust coated the floor in uneven piles, crunching under the investigators' boots. At first glance, it looked like any other carpenter's workspace tools hanging neatly on hooks, planks stacked against the wall, but a set of heavy chains bolted to the floor broke the illusion immediately. Near the back, an unmarked wooden door led to a narrow staircase. The basement below was not part of the original building. It looked as though Victor had dug it out himself. The walls were unfinished, rough earth reinforced with wooden beams. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a dim yellow light that barely reached the corners. What they found down there was more disturbing than anything they had imagined. Against one wall stood a crude wooden frame fitted with restraints at the wrists and ankles, padded not for comfort but to prevent injury that would shorten suffering. The surface beneath was stained in irregular dark patches that later tested positive for human blood. Across the room, a workbench held a collection of pliers, knives, and small saws tools that had been cleaned but not well enough to hide the traces of flesh and hair lodged in their joints. In a far corner sat a small wooden box, its latch rusted but still functional. Inside were dozens of fingernails and toenails, some brittle with age, others fresher. Each piece had been carefully wrapped in tissue and labeled with dates written in black ink. It was not a random assortment, this was a collection. Forensic teams swabbed every surface, bagging fibers, hairs, and spakes of dried blood for testing. On the restraints, they found DNA matching Emily Hart. The same result came from the interior of the box, confirming her as one of several victims. Traces of chloroform were discovered in an old bottle tucked under the stairs, along with coils of rope identical to the fibers embedded in Emily's skin. Despite the mounting evidence, Victor insisted he had no connection to Emily's death. He claimed the basement was part of an old project, the box of nails just something he had found years ago. His calm demeanor only unsettled the officers more. Still, there was one glaring problem: no physical evidence yet tied him to Pine Hollow Forest, the site where Emily's body had been found. The workshop revealed horrors, but the missing link between this room and the clearing in the woods kept the case from being airtight. Detectives knew the truth was close, but something about the story still didn't fit. Just as the prosecution was preparing to bring charges against Victor Hale, a discovery shifted the entire direction of the case. The black van, still in police custody, had its GPS system examined in detail. Investigators expected to find coordinates leading to Pine Hollow Forest on the night Emily disappeared. Instead, the data revealed that the van had been hundreds of miles away, crossing into another state during the exact time frame of her abduction and murder. The log showed a continuous journey with no gaps, meaning Victor could not have driven it to the diner or the forest. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigative team. If Victor hadn't been there, who had used his van? Forensic reanalysis of the crime scene brought another surprise. A second male DNA profile had been found on Emily's clothing, previously dismissed as contamination. This time, the sample was run through the national database. It matched someone far closer to Victor than anyone expected: his younger brother, Aaron Hale. Aaron was 6 years younger, with a long record of violent offenses that had never escalated to murder, at least not officially. He had vanished from public records almost a year earlier, reportedly after a dispute with his last employer. Detectives now learned that Aaron had been secretly living in Victor's workshop basement for months, slipping in and out without his brother's knowledge. The hidden entrance beneath the tool racks explained how he could remain undetected. When investigators confronted Victor with this information, his shock appeared genuine. He admitted that he and Aaron had been estranged for years, rarely speaking. He insisted he had no idea Aaron was using his property, let alone for something so horrific. While his claims were difficult to verify, the GPS evidence and DNA made it clear that Aaron, not Victor, had abducted Emily. The manhunt for Aaron intensified. Surveillance cameras along rural roads eventually captured him near an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the hills, living off stolen food and scavenged supplies. Inside the cabin, police found clothing belonging to Emily and other missing individuals. The wooden box from Victor's basement, once thought to hold the full extent of Aaron's trophies, was only a fraction of his collection. Several more boxes were hidden under loose floorboards, each containing neatly wrapped fingernails and toenails, labeled with dates spanning more than a decade. The case against Aaron grew rapidly. Forensic links tied him to multiple unsolved disappearances in neighboring counties. He had used Victor's van, tools, and secluded property as the perfect cover, knowing that suspicion would naturally fall on his older brother. Emily's murder, while brutal in its own right, was just one chapter in a long series of sadistic acts committed under the radar. When Aaron was finally captured, he showed no sign of remorse. Investigators realized that Emily's death was never meant to end the way it did. Her discovery had simply come sooner than he intended. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Emily's case had not only unmasked a killer, it had exposed years of horror that might have otherwise remained buried forever.